Week 12 brought us a lot of chaos in the world of college football. You talk about the college football playoff rankings, those have updated now and kind of shifted around. A lot of teams that were still in the mix are no longer in the mix. It's an exciting week 13 that we get now to be able to preview, being able to go down through the college football playoff rankings and breaking those down. We've got all of it here and much more on SEC Primetime Live here at SEC at the Voice of College Football. I'm Josh Mahler, joined by Andrew Miller and Tucker Harlan. Guys, it's going to be an exciting Week 13 for some teams. I think overall the conference really isn't going to change too much, I don't think, because most of these games just seem like they're all against the FCS, basically another bye week. But nonetheless, the games that we're going to be talking about, we've got some top opponents going against each other. Some teams maybe on upset alert, and we'll talk about all of that and so much more. First, for everybody watching, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep on growing so much here. And then share it with a friend. If you share the stream, share it on social media. Do whatever you can to help us keep on growing here at SEC, at the Voice of College Football. Anyways, let's get into it, guys. First, starting off with the college football playoff rankings, which came out yesterday. The playoff picture now looks just a little bit different when we look at all of these teams and where they stand. You've got some teams, such as Oklahoma, being one of them that it really stands out, obviously, to me, as being one of the teams that gets in. Texas, not really in the picture anymore. I think there's a few other teams that we could probably bring up. But looking at the college football playoff here, I mean, you start to see very close to what it feels like it should be towards the end of the season as we're coming down to the last 2 weeks, and teams really just have to win out and close out and do what they've got to do on their side and just kind of go through the motions. But I mean, Tucker, when you look at the rankings, obviously we're all going to have our own opinions about how the rankings should have been. When you look at the rankings, what are some of the tweaks that you would make personally in the college football playoff rankings?
Yeah, so there's several tweaks I would make in this. The committee is obviously very imperfect. They've made some decisions that are questionable. They do it every single week. They did it all of last year too, and they've done it every single time there's a college football playoff. The BCS model was a much less flawed system than what we got now in the college football playoff. But there's several that I have in this scenario because Ohio State is still number one. They're clinging to that win against Texas from September. And you look past that, you got the win at Illinois, and I guess Illinois is still ranked. But, I just don't feel like it is as impressive of a win as what Indiana and Texas A&M have been able to do. Indiana getting that win at Oregon, I for, basically a year and a half said, this Kurt Signetti guy, he radiates fake tough guy energy for a little while, but that's no longer the case. They beat Oregon out there. They've proven me wrong. But they still are not going to face all of the top teams in the Big Ten routinely. And none of the Big Ten teams do that just because you'll have like 3 or 4 games of Northwestern, Purdue, and Maryland in between every difficult game in that conference. I also slid Texas A&M ahead of Ohio State in my rankings. I just think that win at Notre Dame weighs a little bit more than a home win against Texas to begin the season. And, recency bias isn't really a factor here because that was early on in the season. And, hey, if the committee's opinion of Notre Dame is that valuable, then maybe you should be looking at that Texas A&M win at Notre Dame as, maybe a superior win to what to what Ohio State did against Texas at the beginning of the season. I kept Georgia where it is. I think that's pretty fair. They finished 7-1 in SEC play. You got a head-to-head win against Ole Miss. I put Ole Miss actually ahead of Texas Tech because I think Texas Tech, while they have been pretty dominant in the Big 12, I do think that's a league that overall is not quite as strong as we've seen in the past. Like the SEC and Big 12 were going at it with each other early in the season. Some of the lower tier teams in the SEC were victorious, mainly Mississippi State and Auburn against the middle of the pack of the Big 12. So, credit to what Texas Tech has been able to do, but that's the highest seed that I've got coming out of that conference. Keeping Oregon at 7, and then I'm keeping Oklahoma at 8. Slid Alabama and BYU ahead of Notre Dame. Not a fan of putting Notre Dame all that high. It's like if you schedule them, you get punished for doing it as a Power Four team now. So like scheduling Notre Dame essentially has as much worth as scheduling one of these high end group of five teams, like say a Memphis or a Tulane, as a Power Four school. You shouldn't do it now just because it'll cost you against them in the playoff race, and they're an independent. So there's not very many comparable opponents there. I actually slid BYU ahead of them too. I think BYU has been very impressive in the Big 12 for a lot of the season. And then Notre Dame and Vandy are the last two in my top 12. But that is, of course, not how the college football playoff works. You have to have the automatic qualifiers from the ACC and the group of five. ACC, I went with Georgia Tech to get it done in that league because here's the thing. People joked for a while about Diego Pavia kind of being Hugh Freeze's father. Well, guess what? Haynes King is very much Mario Cristobal's father. Beat him when he was at Texas A&M back in 2022. And, of course, you have the infamous 2023 game down there in Miami where Georgia Tech should have lost that game, but for whatever reason, Mario Cristobal decides to run the football instead of kneeling it out, and it was a costly mistake. And then last year, that was one of just two losses for Miami in the regular season. So, and Georgia Tech just keeps finding ways to win football games. I feel like they are still the team to beat in that conference. And then Group of Five, man, give me the North Texas Mean Green. I know Tulane is in there at 12 right now, but I largely base this off of record, but Drew Mestemaker is putting up some serious numbers and doing some pretty serious damage in the American Conference. So I think the winner or the representative of Group of Five has to come out of there because Boise State is down this year, and that typically means the Mountain West is not going to get a team in if Boise State is not doing well. And then I just don't look at the Sun Belt or Conference USA as producing anyone that's quality.
Yeah, I think for the most part, a lot of the movements that you might, I think even some of the ones that you made don't make a huge difference, but some of them that you made even make a difference in just hosting or not. So that's really big, especially for Notre Dame bumping them completely out. I think that's the hardest one for me to defend is Notre Dame because it feels like you're crediting them for a loss, and I've always hated the term a good loss or a bad loss. Every loss is bad. Every loss, there can be worse losses. I think if you end up getting, for example, Texas this past weekend, they had a worse loss than what many predicted, and if they would have had a closer game there, they may still be in the discussion. But because they have a worse loss, then they're not. I don't like the good loss look on any of it. But Andrew, what are some of the things that you disagree with the committee?
I don't necessarily disagree with a ton. I did have some movement in the bottom half. The top four I keep the same, and I totally hear Tucker's argument on Ohio State. The lack of big time wins certainly is hurting them. Look, the Texas win is solid. I know the Longhorns have not lived up to expectations, but it's a good win. Illinois is a good win. I just think Ohio State has looked so dominant this season. And look, maybe it's a product of the schedule. Totally a fair argument, but I think it's hard to not look at that team and think, man, that's the best team in the country. And for that reason, I don't have any problem putting them at number one. And like I said, I agree with the rest of the top four. My first week, I would move Ole Miss up to number five. I think the overall body of work is slightly better than what you have from Texas Tech. But I would still keep the Red Raiders ahead of Oregon. Sooners in at number 8. I think I've got Alabama up at 9. I understand the loss to Florida State and just taking the loss to Oklahoma. I feel like that's a little bit of maybe an overreaction to just what you most recently saw. Obviously, it makes sense to have OU jump ahead of them because of the head-to-head. But I still think the number of wins they have against really solid teams, the Florida State loss is bad. I understand you can't just erase that, even though it was week 1. I think the overall body of work justifies still having them higher. I think I'm making a change here on the fly because I know I sent you mine in, but I honestly keep forgetting about the whole Notre Dame versus Miami dynamic. That is so odd because I think everyone would very clearly say, if you were asked just who's the better football team, pretty much everybody would say Notre Dame. The reality is Miami beat them, and that result does have to matter. So I don't love the way the Canes have played over the course of the season, and I think Notre Dame has some better results since. But look, neither of Miami's losses are necessarily bad. They're not great losses, but they're not to bad teams. And they have a win over Notre Dame. So I think I would still have the U up at number 9, which this is how I would do it. I don't know that this is what the committee's going to do. I think you will definitely, obviously, we see it in the rankings now, but I think going forward, it's going to be hard for Miami to jump them. But I would have the U in up at that spot. BYU at number 11, and then I guess number 12, Notre Dame, which would then kind of put you in a spot um, of, well, I would put Notre Dame at, Notre Dame at 11, BYU at 12, I guess is where I would land on that. Now, as for who would come in after that, because of course, as we mentioned, I do have an ACC team there in the top 12. I don't think Miami's winning the ACC. I don't think the path is there. They have to have a lot of things go right for them to get into the ACC title game. So ultimately, if Miami's getting in this thing, it's as an at-large, and I'm with Tucker. I think Georgia Tech, if they beat Pitt this weekend, they are in the ACC championship game, probably facing Virginia. It looks like the most likely opponent that they would get there. I would like their chances, but I would also like their chances even if SMU has kind of been up and down this season. I don't think Pitt's going to get in at this point, but I would take the Yellow Jackets, and I'm also with Tucker again. North Texas, again, the path is there. They should be able to win out and get into the American Conference Championship, and I think Tulane probably does still have a really solid path to get there. Whereas I think you look at Army, not Army, Navy probably going to take another loss potentially. So I like the path, but we've seen Tulane for as good as they've been. That defense has gotten lit up a couple times by a couple wide open offenses, and I think Texas Tech could hurt them. I know Tucker talked about Mestamaker been very good. Eric Morris doing a great job with that team. So, yeah, I would have the Mean Green in as number 12. And I guess in my bracket would be going to Oxford to open this thing up, which there's obviously a lot of dynamic around that team, as we'll talk about later in the show. But, I don't think there's anything egregious with what the committee's done to this point, but I could definitely see some tweaks.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said. I don't think there's really anything egregious with the rankings the way that they came out. I think a lot of right now what you're seeing is just the committee saying who they think deserves to be in at the end of the season currently, rather than just who is better than who right now. Personally, I know this is probably one that might come with a little bit of bias, but I kind of question Oregon being ranked just one above Oklahoma, because you look at it right now, Oklahoma has 3 wins against the current top 25s. The top 25 that the committee says is top 25. How many does Oregon have on that current top 25? 0. In fact, they lost against the only other one that they've played against in this top 25. That's one of them that I kind of look at, and I feel like I'd probably shift around. I do agree with you guys. I think I would then also look at that Notre Dame. And this is kind of where it comes down to. I don't have a good argument against Notre Dame's 2 losses, right? And especially being one of them under Miami beating them. That's one of them that I really have a hard time battling. But I also do think that Notre Dame, like you said, Andrew, I think that Notre Dame is one of the top teams and should be a playoff team. And so it's really hard because of how they battled back after. And so I hate that aspect of it, but I do kind of agree with Notre Dame being in it. As much as I hate to agree to that, the thing that I hate the most is auto bids. I don't think any conference, any team should really have an auto bid, especially when we're talking about one team that you guys didn't bring up that I think would be my auto bid for the group of 5 right now would be JMU. I think that they seem to be kind of the best team out there right now, with their only loss being really a tough one against Louisville when Louisville was on a hot streak as well. So I take that into some consideration as well. I think JMU, but the fact that we're talking about JMU, Tulane, and North Texas as being playoff contenders over some of these ACC teams that we're talking about, or even BYU and Texas Tech both getting in, regardless of what happens in the Big 12 championship game, or even Utah. I think you look at a lot of different teams, depending on what USC does this weekend against Oregon. I don't know. I think there's a lot of teams that we could be having a lot better discussion of competition if we didn't have these auto bids. That's my main kind of argument against how the committee does these rankings. But ultimately, I think you're just seeing a lot of what we will probably see towards the end of the season. I think you kind of alluded both of you really alluded to it for the most part, is that there's the way that the committee has it ranked right now with Notre Dame at number 9, and you see Ohio State at number 1, IU at number 2. The way that everything's lined up right now, it's pretty much the committee telling you we're not really going to change our minds. So this is kind of what it's going to be at. I guess in terms of the SEC, you really had Oklahoma's win over Alabama and then Georgia beating Texas. Those were the two biggest moves I felt in the SEC to really kind of shake things up, or for Georgia's sake to kind of cement them into the college football playoff, which probably should be just that way. But I guess kind of going away from the playoff rankings right now, anything else kind of outside of the playoffs or anything you guys think can kind of shake things up here in the playoffs?
Tucker, do you have anything?
Yeah, there's a couple different things that could happen. Maybe this Georgia Tech game is interesting here in the future because you've got a Georgia Tech team, like I alluded to earlier, is maybe the best team in the ACC right now. They've been playing hard all season, and you know that they are in a position where they can get to the college football playoff if they just win this week and then get a win in the ACC championship. Now, Georgia, I think it would impact seeding more than anything. I think you would probably be able to keep them in if they were to lose that game. Would they get an auto bye? I don't know, because we'll see what the committee says with Texas Tech if Texas Tech is to win out. I guess the other one, and I'm sure we'll talk about it here next week, but that Iron Bowl has suddenly gotten very interesting because you've got an Alabama team that is playing for both a spot in the SEC championship and they are trying to get into the college football playoff at this point. And you got an Auburn team that's playing with bowl eligibility hopes on the line. And we've seen some kinky things happen down there on the plains when Alabama has gone down there recently. So that one has gotten a lot more interesting. I guess to a lesser degree, you get that in the Egg Bowl this time around, but with that being played in broad daylight, and then also Ole Miss just having an inside track right now, it'd only be a second loss for them, not a third like it would be for Alabama if they were to lose. So, like, I mean, outside of the SEC, I don't really think there are a ton of other dominoes that need to fall. Maybe the Big 12 championship is a separate issue that we discuss later once the bracket gets revealed. But Big 10 is pretty set, in my opinion, and then ACC is just going to be the one team out of the ACC.
Yeah, I feel like the Big Ten really doesn't have any way that it really could get shaken up unless some kind of miracle were to happen where I think Rutgers this weekend upsets Ohio State. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the SEC, the most interesting thing by far is if somehow the ACC and Big 12 could position multiple teams to get into this. I think that's going to be tough. The ACC, oddly, even with where they are in the rankings, might have a better shot just because of Miami having that head-to-head over Notre Dame. Like, if the Canes finish 10-2, and you've got that win, and I know we were talking about Notre Dame a second ago, and both Tucker and I left them out. And as I'm doing that, I'm just like, I mean, that is clearly one of the 12 best teams in the country, and I don't buy the committee when they say 12 best teams. That's very clearly not. And look, I'm not even as someone who, I know you were discussing the auto bids. I actually don't hate the auto bids. I don't mind it. But I see it both ways. But from a Notre Dame standpoint, that feels like a team that's so hard to leave out of this thing with the way they've played over the course of the season, that if you leave them out and you also have Miami sitting there at 10-2 who beat them head to head, it feels hard to leave the Canes out. So I wonder if you do see someone else fall out of this thing that a lot of us are kind of assuming as an inside track at this point. And the Big 12, it may be tough because I just think at this point you're looking at almost a guarantee the runner-up of that conference is going to be a 3-loss team. And I don't think there's going to be a 2-loss in that league with a strong enough resume to get into this. I will say, and I know we're going to get into the coaching search stuff, Ole Miss is fascinating. And I'm not even talking about this from a Mississippi State, rivalry standpoint. I heard an interesting point brought up today by a guy who covers the Rebels very closely, in that does the situation there with Kiffin, if they were to take a loss in the Egg Bowl, and I don't, spoiler, I don't think State's winning that football game. But if that were to happen, could you make an argument against Ole Miss if there's uncertainty about what Kiffin's future is there? Because look, coaching is a part of it is on the sheet. That was the point. It was Neil McCready and Chase Parham both cover the Rebels for 247 Sports, and they were talking about one of the factors, and we kind of saw it with a player a few years ago in Jordan Travis for FSU. Availability, whether it be players or coaches, is considered. And I know we're about to do the coaching stuff here in a sec, but that's weirdly, I think, the most interesting thing from an SEC standpoint. I mean, if Texas beats Texas A&M, what happens there? Could the Longhorns find some sort of a path back into this? Maybe if the Sooners were to drop one of their last 2 games. But it feels like we're talking about next weekend because this weekend slate of games. I mean, look, we have the SEC SoCon Challenge going on.
And you brought one up too. I mean, with Oklahoma losing one of these last 2 games, we'll talk about the Missouri game this weekend. That's one of them that I'm really starting to question these last 2 games for Oklahoma just because of how history has painted itself in the past. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that really could get shaken up still yet down the stretch for the SEC in particular, as we're talking SEC, but really in the world of college football as a whole. So very interesting to see how everything closes out here down the stretch. Let's get into some of the coaching shakeups, and I apologize. I think I sent it to you guys out of order of what I have in my notes now that I'm looking at them, but we'll get through it, I'm sure. First, starting off with one of the bigger ones, talking about Mike Elko and getting an extension. They lock him up. Texas A&M locks him up. Really finalize a massive contract for him, an extension for head coach Mike Elko down there at Texas A&M, where it's going to be a 6-year deal through 2031 with approximately $11 to $11.5 million per year. Makes him one of the top 5 highest paid coaches in college football, which always confuses me how every time anyone ever gets a raise, they're always the top 5 or the top paid of something. And it's the same in the NFL. So-and-so gets a contract and it's the top paid quarterback. I don't understand how every contract is just a record-breaking contract, but it is what it is. And so this one, the deal also kind of had a little bit of a bonus structure for assistant coaches tied into it as well, into college football playoff appearances, which Mike Elko probably feels pretty good about this year, being able to kind of lock that one up. He's 18-5 overall, 10-0 this season with Texas A&M. I understand that Elko is definitely a coach that A&M would want to lock up because he's proven, I think this year, that he's kind of got that monkey off his back, especially after this past weekend of the kind of the way that people look at Texas A&M. But to extend him for such a long time, I think, especially in today's college football, through 2031 is a really long time, Tucker.
Yeah, it is a long time. And to answer your question about top 5 highest paid, that would be inflation, my friends. That is why he is the top 5 highest in the top 5 of highest paid coaches of all time. But no, looking at that deal, it is pretty crazy. For one, Texas A&M has a little bit of a history for doing that stuff, and they have the money to do it. They got all that oil money out there in Texas, as we like to talk about. I mean, I'm sure Texas and Oklahoma have a little bit of that going for them too. But you have all that, and I do wonder about that a little bit with coaches and extending them so early on in their careers. I think he is pretty clearly different than Jimbo Fisher and Kevin Sumlin. I mean, just sideline demeanor for one thing, and two, I mean, one of the smartest coaches in college football. I mean, how many coaches do you find coaching not just in the SEC but anywhere that are UPenn graduates? Right? That those don't come around very often. They don't grow on trees. But again, is it a curse? Like, once I saw that they were extending him, and then suddenly South Carolina was up big at halftime, I was like, did we break this story a little prematurely? Is that what's going on here? But of course, they ended up winning the football game, and I think that is big if you can change the perception around that program, because every year it feels like what we hear out of Texas A&M is how great and awesome they can be and then it's just like 7-5, 8-4. Texas 8-4 has been the joke for a while, but that's no longer the case because they're going to be playing in that Texas game with a chance to go unbeaten in the regular season. So good for them for doing this, I guess. But if he starts to fall apart in the next year or so, then it's not going to look as good.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, I just think in general, especially like I mentioned a moment ago, especially in today's college football landscape, because of the transfer portal and NIL and everything that goes into that, and how your roster can just completely flip. And I commend Texas A&M because I miss the good old days when coaches were just expected to be given time to make something work. And Elko has done remarkably well here in the first 2 years. I kind of agree with you, though. I feel like maybe just premature, even if you are going to go that long of a contract, I think just a little bit premature. But Andrew, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I know Tucker mentioned inflation. The other reason this happens is agents, and it's the same way in the NFL that every single player gets the next highest paid player because that's what the all the agents want, so that their next guy is in line to get paid. And it's the same with the coaches; they want the salary to keep going up so they can make it happen. And agents have total control right now over these athletic departments, no matter what some governors in the state of Louisiana try to suggest. So that's always going to be a part of it. And I see both sides, man. I do agree with thinking he's the guy who's going to get A&M to where they need to be. There does seem to be, as Tucker said, it's different than Jimbo, that you have a guy who is ascending in his career and not someone who is already starting to fall apart post winning a championship at Florida State. The high school recruiting is still at a high level. They brought in a fantastic transfer class this last year, so you see that side of it, which of course in this day and age, a lot of that is NIL related, but we know A&M's got the money. You just have to have a coach who gives the money to the right players, and you seem to have figured that out. He's done a good job with the staffing hires. He made a great decision this year. I believe he took back over the defense. So that worked out for them well, and of course they're having a great season. The other factor, I think Penn State plays a role in this. As Tucker mentioned, he's a Penn grad, and he's from the Northeast, has spent a lot of his time there. I don't think he would have left for Penn State. I think A&M is a, frankly, more desirable job, and it's a place that he had familiarity with. But that's the whole thing when you talk about agents, is they'll scare you like, well, if you don't pay us, he's just going to go take this job. Because I think Penn State 100% would have hired him in a heartbeat. So that's part of it. Look, it's a 6-year deal, so that's not quite as long as we see with some of these contracts. She didn't go out a decade. $11 million per, though, that's still quite a lot of money. I would have to think, unlike Jimbo, this can't be a fully guaranteed contract. I would at least hope for their sake that it's not. I don't have as much of an issue with it because I trust Elko so much. But look, to be fair, I think a couple years ago we would have been saying, after Mike Norvell got a big extension at Florida State, like, hey, this guy's on the come up and is about to have the Noles back to where they've been, and we see what's happened since. If you're A&M, you're certainly hoping that you've got a guy who's going to be established for a long time and a positive, and that this doesn't come crashing back down to earth just a year from now.
Yeah, and I look at the Elko situation, and to your guys' point, yeah, I mean maybe the other teams are reaching out. I just don't know. I mean, I would think with the contract being in place the way it was, I just feel very much premature. But going on to Lane Kiffin, one that has really had this coaching carousel and all the drama behind Lane Kiffin has probably been the biggest storyline when it comes to coaches. I feel like Lane Kiffin comes out and makes fans of really whatever fan base you're of, really college football fans feel like he's staying, but then he's asked about it and he gives kind of a roundabout answer, and then you feel like, I don't know, maybe he's not. I keep on thinking that this story is closed, and then he says something or just doesn't say something to make it feel like it's still open. It's still a story that is unfinished and very, very crazy. So the Ole Miss athletic director, Keith Carter, he's been working proactively to kind of lock up Kiffin with new deal before quote unquote silly season begins. So I liked that quote quite a bit. But anyways, he kind of being linked to LSU, Florida, even some being linked to the Giants, being reunited with Jackson Dart. I don't know how likely that one would be at all. I really don't know how likely any of these positions would be. And the main reason I think, Tucker, is just that Ole Miss gives Lane Kiffin so much cushion to do really whatever he wants, and I just don't know why he would leave that.
Well, I'd rather Amy Adams Strunk make the best decision of her career and hire him to develop Cam Ward with the Tennessee Titans. That's what I'd rather have happen in all this. But no, he's failed in the pro level before, so maybe don't do that. That wouldn't be a great Lane decision. He keeps teasing at it. Andrew and I have mentioned this on this show before, but I really don't think he's going to leave. I just think there have been a lot of changes, not just within the last 15 years, but also within the last 3 or 4. Uh, if his wife is going to move out there, and then his daughter is in school at Ole Miss, and then of course you got a son who is playing quarterback down there for Oxford High School, leading them um, in the playoffs down there in Mississippi. So you got all these people from his life moving there. Like I don't know if you'd want to uproot and go somewhere else at that point. And of course, you got Florida and LSU both jockeying for him at this point. Um, I I really don't see it. I think he is a little bit happier where he is now as opposed to say 16 years ago when he was at Tennessee. Again, he could prove me wrong, but I'm just fairly certain he's not going to leave at this point. Maybe again, could be very wrong about that.
Yeah, well, and Andrew, I think with Lane Kiffin too, he's kind of had to make these different stops along the way to get to where he's at now because a lot of teams wouldn't have looked at him back in the day because of the image that is Lane Kiffin, and now he was able to kind of reshape, reform that image at Ole Miss, and that image has now become a part. I guess Ole Miss has become a part of his image now. Um, do you still kind of feel like the story is just kind of closed and maybe overreacted to here at this point?
I don't know. And I think, look, Tucker's right. The last time we've talked about this, I was sort of in alignment with him that I just didn't see him making a move. The last few days have really shifted things a lot. And I think a lot of people around Oxford would tell you that right now. Obviously he sends his family down to both Gainesville and Baton Rouge to start looking at potential houses. That's not a thing. The fact you let that get out publicly and some of the comments he's made in press conferences, taking digs about the crowd, and it feels like the McAfee thing was very much a PR type move that was trying to take the story away from him, but just made the story even more about him. He's very uncommittal about giving an answer when, look, man, if you were staying, you could very easily have signed a deal and have it done with. They have had a contract offer available to him for a long time. And it really seems like his actions over the past, 4 days are reflective of a coach who wants to leave. Now, the crazy part of this is you've got an Ole Miss team that feels like they are a lot to make the playoff. I know I talked earlier, what happens if they lose the Egg Bowl? I think if they lose the Egg Bowl, the only way they don't go to the playoff is if there is just we find out Lane Kiffin's not staying there. I think they will be in if Lane Kiffin is the coach. So you have a chance to coach a team that if you win the Egg Bowl, you're talking about being at least a home playoff host, if not maybe getting a position to have a bye in the first round of contending for a championship. Do you want to up and walk away from it? And it's so weird. And it feels like, I'll be honest, and this is what I think people who have the inside connections in Oxford would tell you right now. The only reason that it's just not established he is gone is because he wants to coach this thing out through the end of the season. Like, he wants to coach his team through the end of the year, through the playoff. Ole Miss, if they're going to let him do that, I know the ultimatum thing he pushed back and said that's not correct, but Ole Miss definitely wants clarity. They are wanting an answer from him very soon about what is your future going to be. And I think he's not fully decided. I think if Ole Miss was not in the playoff race, Lane Kiffin would be headed to either Baton Rouge or Gainesville. And it feels like the talks about Florida have cooled down a lot over the past day. It feels like it's very much an LSU Ole Miss race at this point. I think the only thing that is keeping him considering Ole Miss to this point is the fact that, are you going to walk away from a playoff team? And it seems like Ole Miss has kind of said, we are not going to let you coach this team if you're going to leave in the playoff. Like, you will have – I don't think it's a thing. They're not going to let him coach the Egg Bowl. He will be the coach in that game next week, regardless of whether he's staying or leaving. But after that point, he's going to have to go. And I think if it's LSU or Florida at the same time, they need an answer as well. And that's the frustrating part with the coaching calendar. And this isn't Kiffin's fault. This isn't any of the school's fault. It's just the reality of the situation that you're in. You have the early signing period in December, which I think a lot of schools are willing to kind of punt on that at this point because of the portal. But then the portal window opens up in January 15th. And that's right after the quarterfinals or the quarters or semis, whatever, they get played. You really don't get to wait around past that. And you really need to have a coach in place before that portal window opens up. So that's what really complicates things. Kiffin, it seems like he is positioning himself for a coach who wants to get out and wants to go take another job. And I feel like everything we've talked about with, Ole Miss is the right place for him. And I agree with that. It is a job that, as you said at the start of this, that it affords him to be him. He does not have boosters in his ear in the way that these other jobs would require. And Kiffin is not a guy who wants to deal with that. Ole Miss has a very good NIL setup where it's not just that they have good funding, they have the proper alignment in place where if they need to get money for a player, they're going to go get that money for a player, and it's not a problem where you're not having to go through all these different back channels to get things figured out, which a lot of schools with the NIL, that's the situation they're still in. They were very much ahead of the curve in that. And the expectations are not the same as other places. He's in a position where he can handle things well. He can have the success that he's having and be established there for many years to come. It's just such a weird circumstance to be in. I think he is not going to leave just because I can't imagine walking away from the situation that he's in. But I will not be shocked at this point because everything Lane is doing says, I want to go coach somewhere else. With the comments that he has made, his actions, he's handled it incredibly poorly. I mean, not that I would feel bad for Ole Miss fans, but I also understand why they are as frustrated as they are with him right now when he's making little trolls on Twitter every time he gets a chance and making the comments that he is about attendance, doing some of the stuff he's doing in the media. It just feels like he's trolling somebody. And at this point, I know there's the whole idea of, well, this is all a big ruse so that he can make a big statement of, I'm sticking around, I'm staying, I'm a rebel for life. At this point, his fan base doesn't care about that. Like, we don't want to see the big theatrics. Just tell us that you're staying because you are hurting your team. And I know, like, again, and I'll wrap up here because I know I've been going. There were like statements coming out that for as much as his team has stayed locked in throughout this season, and they haven't had the same thing that happened when he was flirting with Auburn a few years ago, where that team really faded down the stretch. They've stayed locked in or playing hard. Latest reports coming out is that there were a lot of really ticked off players and assistant coaches in Oxford the last couple of days, and practice did not go the way they wanted it to because there's people frustrated with they don't know what their coach is going to do. So it's a weird situation there, and they got the bye week to get it figured out, but they really need to act quick.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you went for a while on that one because I think you're probably the closest one to that situation too. And it's a stressful time for the fan base there at Ole Miss. What's going to happen, not just with our future, but this season, if this all ends up shaking out the wrong way, are we really going to make the playoffs and then our coach leaves? That's a terrible situation because then now if the coach leaves right before you make it to the playoffs and then a bunch of players leave, do you just get left out of the playoffs altogether because of all of that? Or do you still get put in and then just now you're an embarrassment? But another stressful situation is down in South Carolina where Shane Beamer was kind of on a warm seat regardless of how this season ended up finishing, but then blowing a 27-point lead against Texas A&M after walking into the locker room up 30-3 and throwing your fists up in the air in celebration, walking away with that one then with Texas A&M end up coming up to really go and leave South Carolina scoreless there in the second half and end up dominating that game in such a weird, a very strange fashion. So with South Carolina now sitting at 3-7, they've got just two more games left. Can't even qualify for a bowl game. I know that South Carolina doesn't really necessarily have expectations of the likes of what maybe a typical Florida, LSU, Alabama, Georgia, some of these higher brands may have, but they still had some expectations for Shane Beamer, and especially this season. And I think a lot of people did have high expectations. I think, Andrew, I can remember you and I talking very highly about South Carolina leading into the season. And then they've had this kind of a season where they're sitting there fighting for a fourth win, and not able to do that. So Shane Beamer's buyout sits approximately 27, 28 million through 2030. So there is a financial discussion to be had there, but you also have to take into effect of what has happened this season and how bad South Carolina has looked. I know Paul Feinbaum kind of suggested that Beamer may need to beat Clemson in order to save his job. Tucker, starting off with you, how hot is that seat for Shane Beamer right now?
The Shane Beamer era is one of the most confusing things I've seen in recent SEC football memory. He came in and got them to a bowl game immediately. You figure year two, they would probably progress a little bit, and they did. Year three, you bring back your quarterback, but guess what? Your offensive line stinks now, so they plummet to 5-7. There's no expectation the next year, and you think he might get fired in year four, but no, he goes out and wins 9 games, and suddenly the fan base enjoys him again. You bring back that quarterback, you're expecting big things this season, but guess what? You messed up another offensive coordinator hire, and your offensive line stinks again. You could go 4-8 to end this season. I don't know how they'll do against Coastal Carolina, how motivated they'll be for that game. I'm not going to say 3-9 is totally off the table, but 4-8 is a little more likely than that. Probably 5-7 in that mix too. It's a bad look, man. If Texas A&M had been playing in Columbia and had been, let's say, maybe 7-3 in that game, not or no 6-3 at that point, not um undefeated, maybe you fire him right then and there. But no, Texas A&M was unbeaten at the time, and it was a road game. So that, I think, is one factor to consider here, and why they're not moving quicker, I guess, with this. But there has to come a point in time where you get tired of it after a while. All the outbursts on the sidelines, um, just consistently relying on your defense and special teams to make plays when it's not always there. I know that's something Andrew and I have talked about. It's not a style of football that has been conducive to winning there all the time, as we've seen in the odd years here recently. I think you're in desperate need of a turnaround. And I think one of the questions in this whole coaching carousel nationally was, maybe Shane Beamer wants to restart the clock and go to Virginia Tech. But now that Virginia Tech has made its move, you're just kind of stuck with them. And you need to turn the ship around quickly. At the very least, get back to a bowl game next season, or else you're really going to be feeling it from the fan base, if not fired. So I'm very intrigued by that Palmetto Bowl. But yeah, that is that's not a good situation down there in South Carolina right now. He is probably the next man up on the hot seat if Mark Stoops is not that guy already.
Yeah, and I think I look at this, Andrew. I personally think that the seat is definitely hot. I just think with the way that this coaching carousel looks right now, it might not be the time to make their move just yet.
I'm in agreement, and I do think he will get some credit for last year, as that gave him a little bit of a buffer. This has definitely been a far shot. Like, I don't know if I was the one who was high on South Carolina coming in, because I'll tell you, I was not super high on the Gamecocks coming into this season. I did think their schedule was a lot more manageable than it's worked out being. But look, they did lose quite a bit on both sides of the ball ultimately, and you know, this season has been a big disappointment for sure. You're right, Tucker. Texas A&M being an undefeated team helps out a lot, but man, when you blow a 30-3 lead, that's tough. That's a really tough pill to swallow. And I kind of think, if not for the current coaching market, they might go ahead and make a move. I think that factor is limiting them. I think they also recognize you've got. I do not buy into the NFL hype on Lenore Sellers whatsoever. I think he's another one of these, like, we're falling in love with tools and not a guy who's actually great at playing quarterback. But he's someone that clearly in college you can win with and win a lot with, because of the tools that he has available to him from an athleticism standpoint. You've got this quarterback that could be a really special piece. I know there's rumors about him hitting the portal, but like, what if you can keep your coach in place one more year? And I think he likes playing for Beamer. Hold the Norse around, go out and get an actual OC who is going to run a system that can maximize what Lenore Sellers can do and see if that improves things. Look, the recruiting has not been bad. That's the weird part is he's done a good job recruiting. Now, the portal side of things, they've not been great, but I also think they've done a pretty good job retaining the players on their roster. So they haven't gone and brought in a lot of pieces. I think that'll probably be an emphasis this year is you've got to go out and bring in a good portal class to strengthen up. Offensive line is obviously a train wreck. They fired that O-line coach. We'll see if that gets fixed. I think I can see them giving it one more year. I don't even think it's the buyout. I think it's do you want to enter the coaching market in this season? And that narrative is probably a little bit overblown because I do think there are plenty of good coaches out there who you could hire. But the problem is guys that we can look at and say, hey, that guy's actually a really good coach. It could be successful. A lot of college football fans and boosters don't view it that way. It's very much, it's got to be a big name. And you're not going to get a big name if you're South Carolina in this cycle. I could also see South Carolina, maybe some ulterior motive here holding on to him. I don't know if you guys have looked at who they're playing next season. And obviously these games are not in order because dates have not been set. But, they'll have Towson and in the non-con. I guess they have a couple non-con games to still figure out, besides Clemson, of course, which will be on the road. They have to go to Alabama, to Arkansas, to Florida. We'll see on those teams. But at Oklahoma, Georgia comes to town, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Texas A&M. There's a lot of teams you can lose to, and a lot of teams you're probably going to lose to, even if you improve quite a bit in the offseason. This might be a case of if you're South Carolina, you say, look, he's not going to win his way out of this next year. And we can make a move when we're going to be higher in the pecking order a season from now. Either Lenore Sellers is awesome for us one more year and we feel good moving forward, or we just lose a lot of games and we can easily make a move.
Yeah, there's a lot that has already gone down on the coaching carousel and a lot more that could happen. And even just within the SEC, of course, Arkansas, also another team that's out there looking for a coach. Not quite as big of a brand as these others that we've mentioned, but nonetheless.
John Gruden talk there.
Yeah, I know. I've heard a lot of it, and I don't know how I feel about it. But we'll definitely see where that one ends up. Anyways, we'll go ahead and move on. We'll get to our predictions. Let's get to some previews of this week. Like I said, a lot of teams. So Texas A&M going against Samford, Georgia hosting Charlotte, Alabama, Eastern Illinois, Auburn playing Mercer. That could be a tight one. Who knows? Then we've got South Carolina playing Coastal Carolina. I guess we could have probably at least put that one in there because for some reason that could be a good game. But then LSU, Western Kentucky. But we're gonna boil it down, and we're gonna be talking about Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Texas, Arkansas, Florida, Tennessee, and Oklahoma versus Missouri. Starting off with our first matchup here, Kentucky, Vanderbilt. A matchup where Kentucky is fighting for bowl eligibility, where Vanderbilt is fighting for a discussion of could we possibly make it to the college football playoffs. Let me back up and say that again. Vanderbilt is talking about a possibility and discussions of making it to the college football playoffs. Now, Tucker, hopefully we just hear a squash to the end of that for your sake from your Vols. But nonetheless, this matchup I think is a very intriguing one because Kentucky is kind of known for being an upset team, really. That's about all they've really been known for a long time. And they can be that team. How do you see this matchup, Tucker, between Kentucky and Vanderbilt? How do you see this one playing out?
Well, oddly enough, Kentucky has not lost down there in, I believe, 10 years. They got beat 21-17 by that team that it was one of Kyle Schirmer's first teams at Vanderbilt. I know Derek Mason was the coach back then. Vanderbilt's defense was really, really good that season, but the offense was non-existent. They were 4-8. Your average Vanderbilt team back then. This is better than your average Vanderbilt team. Because like the last time they were this good, they were whooping up on Kentucky in those years. Like there were a couple 30, 40-point beatdowns in the James Franklin years. And I don't think it's going to be quite like that. I think Kentucky has shown some improvement, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. That said, I do think Vanderbilt probably ends up winning this game. And you're going to have that fight in Neyland Stadium for college football playoff conversations, which Tennessee would love to end that. At least go out on a high note there if it can't win in Florida this weekend. But I'll say this about Kentucky though, because obviously there's this game that they could win and potentially get into a bowl game. Keep your eyes on the Governor's Cup. Louisville dropped a funky one to Clemson the other week. So it may be able to lose this game and still find its way into a bowl game. I do think this will be competitive because, pretty much every game Vandy's played at home this year against an SEC team has been competitive. But I do think the Doors get it done in this one.
Yeah, and the spread currently sitting there right around 10-point favorites for Vanderbilt in Nashville. How do you see this one shaking up, Andrew?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a strong feeling either way in terms of who wins it, because I do think Kentucky could be competitive in this game. I think 9.5 is way too much. Kentucky's been playing better. And I'm not overreacting to a game against Tennessee Tech, but Cutter Bowley's been playing better at quarterback. McGowan and Dowdell at running back is a good duo. So they have something on offense. And defensively, it's been stronger the last few weeks. Now, that's been some pretty poor offenses that they have faced. And Vanderbilt, of course, has a lot more firepower. I think the Doors could probably put some points up themselves, but I don't hate Kentucky's chances of keeping this competitive. I do feel like there's a little bit of life around that program now. And I think coming into the year, we sort of all buried Kentucky under Mark Stoops. Is the only reason this guy's not fired is because we don't want to pay an insane buyout for him. But I will not be shocked if Kentucky finds a way to close this year strong and get back to a bowl game. So I like Kentucky to be able to score some on Vanderbilt in this game. The Commodore defense is not nearly as strong as I think it looked for parts of the season. They have had some teams be able to put some points up on them. So I could see some points in this one, and I think Kentucky keeps it close.
For Vanderbilt, too, I feel like a lot of it has been just second half adjustments, making adjustments to your opponent and finding a way. I mean, we saw that. The Texas game really stands out to me for that, getting themselves right there in the thick of it with a chance, just not able to close out. Or, several games where they're down and they just find a way to turn it around and come back and win. It's strange to see Vanderbilt kind of going against my narrative of them in the offseason. I said coming into this season, I just said they're not that good of a team. They beat Alabama, and everyone just kind of views them as being good now. And I don't think that's the case. They proved me wrong. So I think Vanderbilt is going to get it done. But I definitely agree with both of you. I think this can be a close game, and I think this is one that Kentucky has been looking better, and they are going to try to fight for that bowl eligibility because – let's be honest, it does mean something to a lot of programs. For most programs, I think even Oklahoma last year, that's not your expectation whatsoever if you're the University of Oklahoma, but you still would be much more disappointed without that bowl eligibility. And so, I think Kentucky, it's going to be a very close game. I think Vanderbilt gets it done, but it's going to be one of those uncomfortable comeback wins for the Vanderbilt Commodores. All right, moving on to our next matchup. We've got a pretty good one, what could be a good one, between Texas and Arkansas. I think this is kind of an interesting one now because Texas, how do you respond after a disappointing loss to Georgia? But it's one of those losses that you can kind of get past other than the fact that you got kind of manhandled by Georgia. And that seems to be Texas's weak spot is going against Georgia, and then Arkansas. They can play spoiler here in what is a bit of a rivalry, and so they can kind of play spoiler a little bit. And where I'm looking at the ESPN predictor for what percentage Texas has to make it to the college football playoff, and they're sitting at 7%. So I don't have high expectations that they would be able to make it back into the talks, mainly because they got beat so badly. If they barely lost to Georgia, I think we're having a different discussion about that. But for Arkansas, you can just kind of keep your rival as much as you want to consider them rivals. You can keep them down. What stands out to me, as you guys can see on the stats there on the screen, is turnover margin, where Texas doing really well, +8 in the turnover margin, where Arkansas just turns it over way too much, -10 in the turnover margin, and allowing way too many yards because they are a solid offense, but just no defense to back them up. And Texas, quite the opposite, a good defense with some struggles on the offensive side. Tucker, What's going on down there in DKR this weekend?
So I watched the Hogs firsthand this year in Neyland Stadium, and I have a pretty good feeling I know the answer to what will happen down there in DKR because Arkansas is going to play you hard. They've played everybody hard this season. And Texas really hadn't blown anybody out outside of maybe Oklahoma just because they were able to score that special teams touchdown late. But that's a little bit of a stretch calling that a blowout, I feel like.
And we won't even talk about any block in the backs on that either. So
No blocks in the back whatsoever. But no, like you look at the road games that they won against Mississippi State and Kentucky, they had to get through Vandy because of an onside kick that they that did not go the way of the Commodores. So they've not exactly blown anybody out either. So you have to figure this is probably going to be closer than 8.5 points. But again, as productive as Arkansas is offensively, they turned the ball over a lot. They turned the ball over 3 times against Tennessee in that game, even though they had almost 500 yards of offense. Like, that's just what they'll do to you. So Texas defensively, this is going to be one of the toughest challenges, or at least for Arkansas to go up against on the defensive end, because I think Auburn and LSU were the 2 other teams that they play that you could make that conversation about. But I think Texas is defensively a little bit better. But overall, just in terms of a final score, I think you see something more akin to what you saw last week in Baton Rouge between Arkansas and LSU. Not a game that is super high scoring, probably very, very close, but I think Texas gets it done ultimately.
yeah, I think with Texas, Andrew, I kind of the big thing that comes up in my mind, the question that comes up in my mind is Texas going to be demoralized after possibly missing out on the college football playoffs, or do they close this thing out and come out angry?
It's certainly a possibility, and I know they are fighting for a last little hope. But look, you talked about the rivalry aspect here. One side cares about this rivalry, the other does not, and the side that cares is Arkansas. And Texas doesn't really care about this game whatsoever. I think Bobby Petrino at this point knows he's not getting the job, but I could still see Arkansas wanting to fight and find a way in this game. And y'all are right, Texas' defense is good, but I talked about this going into the last week, and I know I talked a little bit more of a shootout last week because I thought Arch Manning would have a good day, and I am the fact they had the day they did against Georgia, and I know it's Georgia and on the road, but Georgia's defense hadn't been as dominant this season, and they got shut down. Texas's secondary, you can throw against them. You can have success through the air against Texas. We have seen multiple teams do that now this season, and Taylor Green of the Arkansas passing attack is legit. Now, we also know Texas has a good pass rush. Arkansas gives up a lot of sacks. They also give up a lot of pressure. And when you give up that pressure, that's why they're minus 10 in turnover margin. That is a huge part of it. So I fully expect the Texas defense to make some big plays and get the negative plays necessary to probably push them to a win. But I think the Hogs can score some here. It just comes down to the other side of the ball. Can Texas look competent at all? And again, the performance against Georgia does worry me a little bit, but they have been better offensively overall, I would say, for the past month of the season, mostly for Texas. So I think the Longhorns still get it done, but I think the Razorbacks can cover that number. But yeah, I do think this will be a challenge for the Texas defense. Arkansas's offense is pretty strong.
Yeah, I agree with you too. I think this is going to be one of those matches where Arkansas has really nothing to gain from winning this game other than just pride over what they view as a rival. And I do agree with you in that sense. I think it will be a tight game. I feel like this would be one that would be a tight game until the fourth quarter, or it would be the other way around where it feels like a blowout and Texas lets off the gas, and then Arkansas marches their way back to make it close. It's crazy to me to look at Arkansas to see how they started this season, and it felt like they might be a pretty good team until losing to Ole Miss kind of hurt. But they kept it really close with them, which I thought was impressive. And then losing to Memphis, that one definitely kind of dropped them down a little bit in terms of respect from everyone else looking in. But then getting dominated by Notre Dame, that was the one that really kind of told the tale of, okay, this team is pretty well over and Sam Pittman is on his way out. And sure enough, this is a crazy game to look at. I think Texas handles their business. I think they end up coming away with the win. I do agree with what both of you had said with Arkansas's offense. That's one that's just scary, putting up 470 yards per game on offense. It's a scary offense, one that can definitely test Texas's defense. If Texas comes out and fights, knowing that hey, they don't hold their own destiny, but they can do everything in their power to make the case be there. Um, that's really all that they can do at this point. And so I think you have to close out the season strong. I do think that that's the Texas team that we'll see here in these last two games. Whether they'll beat Texas A&M at this point, I'm not sure of. But we'll definitely talk about that one next week. But as of this game, I'm going to take Texas to win. I kind of agree with you, Andrew. I'm not sure about that spread, just because it could get kind of scary, especially there down the closing stretch. But I do think Texas ends up pulling this one out as well. All right, going on to our third matchup here. And really, I kind of combined this one with the Oklahoma-Missouri game. I was really having a hard time of which one you really consider the game of the week for us. And so I kind of combined both of these, although I think maybe Oklahoma has a little bit more riding on it than Tennessee, Florida. But yet, another, I don't know, Tucker, is this one a rivalry to you guys there in Knoxville?
I'm ready to get hurt again.
So maybe a one that Tennessee fans aren't looking forward to as often. But no, I think this is definitely an interesting matchup because again, it's a Florida team that is just unpredictable to me. That's kind of what I get from this Florida team all season long, unpredictable. And that's kind of been the memo or the kind of the vibe that I get from Florida. Where Tennessee, I feel like Tennessee should be able to come out with this one, but that unpredictability is kind of what scares me here in this matchup, Tucker.
Josh, do you know the last time that Tennessee won a game in the Swamp?
I don't.
2003. It's a drought. It's a drought. And there are all kinds of crazy things that happen in the Swamp that should never happen in a regular college football matchup that do, with Florida coming out and getting wins. I mean, goodness gracious, the 2015 game where Tennessee is up 27-14, Butch Jones, instead of going for two, decides to kick a field goal. And then they come back, they convert like a fourth and forever and score a touchdown on the play with Antonio Callaway. They win it 28-27. Both teams stunk in 2017, but the game is tied 2020. Florida is on its own side of the 50-yard line. I think at like the 45-yard line, Felipe Franks just chucks one to a guy who is just streaking wide open on the plate of the end zone to win the game 26-20 in regulation with a Hail Mary. Again, both teams were not good in 2013, and Florida had a worse record than Tennessee that year. Florida still won the game by double digits. And then you fast forward to the most recent meeting in the Swamp, which was 2023. Tennessee finished that season with 8 wins. Florida finished with just 5 wins. I was down there. Tennessee had an absolute meltdown in the second quarter and lost the game 29-16. It never goes well for Tennessee in the Swamp. It's not gone well basically for 22 years. And you go before 2001, the game they had to make up because of 9/11. They didn't win in the Swamp for like the previous 30 seasons. Now, granted, they didn't play every year at that point, but it still stands. Good things do not happen in the Swamp often for Tennessee. So, and the thing with Florida, and I said this on our Florida show earlier on in the week, even when they are not having a good year, they are still not a bad football team. And they're always going to have athletes down there in Florida. I did just look at the availability report. One of Tennessee's starting guards, Wendell Moy, is listed as questionable, which could be a problem going in there, especially since Caleb Banks, who's now off the report and available to play for Florida, naturally since the first time since September. We just get accustomed to these things with Tennessee and Florida, like just nonsense happening every single year. And I guess the good news for Tennessee, if you'd call it good news that they're not going to a college football playoff, is that they're really just playing for bowl position at this point. And Florida, having lost last week at Ole Miss, that takes them down to 3-7. They're not competing for bowl eligibility anymore, but they are competing to kind of try and sell themselves to whoever that next head coach would be. We'll see who that is, but it's an if not now when thing for Tennessee because you're not going to go down there again until 2029. I will be 27 years old by that point. I cannot go 26 years of my life between wins for Tennessee and the Swamp. That just can't happen, especially when Florida for a lot of those years has not been good. Um, I'm going to say Tennessee does it. I don't think they quite cover that 4.5. They're going to have to score some points. Um, and you know what's insane is if Florida wins this game and they lose to Florida State at home the next week, they'll be 4-8 to finish the season. But guess what? They won't have lost an SEC home game. Like
Wow.
that's what you're dealing with at Florida, man. They are never truly an awful football team, even though their record might say they are. So I'm going to pick Tennessee to win. I am not 100% confident in that prediction, though.
Yeah, I think it's the prediction that you have to go with because it's just, yeah, if you're being smart about it, that's the team that should win this game, right? And that is the better team. But Andrew, do you think that Tennessee finally ends that streak, or breaks that streak and is able to finally win down in Gainesville?
I think they do, and I think they'll cover. And obviously, I don't have battered Vol syndrome, so I can't. I'm killing him there because I'm being optimistic, and I know that's I guess that's bad juju. But look, I just think Florida defensively. I know there's been a lot of talk throughout the season. Well, that was a pretty good unit for much of the year. They've had games, especially. I keep going back. These teams that have questionable secondaries, and I know they have injuries on the back end that has hurt them a lot. Mississippi State had several opportunities to get wide open throws down the field against them, running the same or at least similar system to what Tennessee runs. Ole Miss had a big day through the air, also had a big day on the ground against Florida. Zach Branch for Georgia was able to have a big game. I just look at the weapons that Tennessee has on offense and think they will be able to give the Florida defense enough problems. Yes, Florida does have some weapons offensively, and at their best, they can find ways to make some plays. But I also think Tennessee's defense is good enough at creating enough negative plays to limit a Florida team that likes to get in its own way, that is poor on third down. They turn the ball over some. So I think, Florida will probably score a few points in this one, but I don't think there's going to be enough consistency. And I think as long as Tennessee protects the football, probably going to be able to put the ball in the end zone. So I will take the Vols, and I think they'll cover.
Yeah, I think protection of the ball, the turnover margin was definitely one that I was looking at for this game, specifically just because I've seen both teams deal with the turnover margin. But for Florida, I don't know, they've had games where they're able to get takeaways and still can't win them. I don't see a way for Florida to turn this thing around, and just to the point that they have absolutely nothing to gain from this win other than, like you mentioned, I think, Tucker, just to maybe pitch to their next possible head coach that, hey, look at what we've got here. It's just such an unpredictable team. I do think Tennessee wins. I think they should win comfortably. I think they win by 10, 15 points. And I'm sorry that we're kind of going a clean sweep here, but like I said, I think that this is just one of those matchups that you would be silly to pick Florida in this matchup if you were to predict it. Now, we all see the possibility where Florida comes away with the upset, and I think that this one would be one of those that everyone's like, yeah, but are we surprised? No. But nonetheless,
He's going to be so mad at us next week.
See, I'm already angry at my co-host. Shout out Jordan Binkley, wherever you are, because he said he wanted a night game in the Swamp before the season because it would be cooler outside. You wanted a night game in the Swamp? Are you insane? No, you don't want a night game in the Swamp for Tennessee. Bad things happen down there.
Yeah, and you know what? The Swamp doesn't really have the draw that it once did anymore, but for this game, it kind of brings that back out, right?
Ugh, yeah. I just having been down there, man, it's not an easy place to win. Like it's one of the toughest environments in the SEC. Like obviously, people mentioned Death Valley and they mentioned Nilo. The Swamp is right there with them in terms of just difficult places to play. Now, part of that is they are feeding off the heat down there in Florida, and the other thing too is like that place. It is in the middle of nowhere, Florida. It's like the closest town is like an hour away in Lake City, or you drive another hour down to Ocala. There's just not much in between there. You're not going to the beach down there. You're not going to ride roller coasters either. It is just thick humidity and literally in the middle of a swamp down there in Florida. It's not fun. As you can tell, I have bad memories. I also got sick like the day after I went down there to the swamp, so that adds to it. Like nobody that is a Tennessee fan that goes down to the swamp has an enjoyable experience, unless you went down there in 2003 or 2001, in which case I'm happy for you, but you are a much different person now than you were then.
No, I think you should have a little bit more hope and a little more faith in your team here this year. Anyways, no, I think Tennessee ends up coming away with this one just fine. But we'll put all that bad juju. Maybe us all predicting for Tennessee gives them the momentum that they need. Who knows? Anyways, we'll move into our last matchup here. Missouri going to Norman, and you talked about a long streak. Do you know the last time that Missouri won a game down in Norman?
I'm not gonna say it actually because you tweeted it earlier today and I saw it.
So you saw it. It's been since
I did see it.
1966. You
Yeah.
talk about a long streak. Now it has been a while since Missouri has played in Norman, but it really hasn't been that long. Maybe 2007, something like that. It might have been a little later than that. I don't have that pulled up in front of me, but 1966 since Missouri has won in Norman. That's a long streak, and it's also a time where Missouri comes into this game possibly having Bo Prabula. Do you still have that availability report up?
Doubtful, listed as doubtful right now,
Okay.
Josh.
So probably don't have him. I think that totally swings my persuasion of this game a lot more. Not that I thought that Missouri would be able to come out with the upset, although it's still on the table. I think the biggest thing in this game that really leans in Oklahoma's favor is you look at last week against Alabama. Oklahoma's biggest strength on defense didn't really slow anything down for Alabama because that's their run defense, where Alabama doesn't utilize that run. In this game, it's totally different, where that run defense now stops their biggest contribution to their offense. You stop guys like Ahmad Hardy, who just had a 300-yard game last week. You stop him, and this looks like Oklahoma's strength now plays into their strength. And which one do you take in that matchup? Obviously, I think you lean towards Oklahoma just because they seem to be the more complete and more whole team at this point. And then, of course, especially with Bo Prabula being out and now on to really their third string quarterback, this game also being played in Norman. I think this game being played in Norman, an 11 a.m. kickoff when this is now a top 25 matchup, is just absolutely criminal. Not only that, but the other thing that worries me, and I don't know if you saw this online too, or on X, was the fact that Oklahoma playing with their dark Unity jerseys, the dark gray, and in broad daylight just does not make any sense to me. But then for this matchup on top of that, and so it does mean that Oklahoma, I believe, no, I don't even think this is homecoming. I think that had already passed. And so it's not even a homecoming or anything like that you could kind of feed into, feed a little bit into the fire. But I think Oklahoma, looking at how they have played here recently, and I think that the biggest thing that stands out to me, you can see on the screen, Oklahoma's turnover margin sitting at -2, and a lot of that comes from earlier in the season where Oklahoma just wasn't getting the turnovers. They had a couple against Temple. They finally started to get those turnovers against Tennessee and against Alabama, and that was basically the deciding factor in both of those games. I think that's a big thing for Oklahoma right now, where that defense finally tastes the blood. They finally taste what it feels like when they're able to get those turnovers, and that's the big thing that wins these games for them. And as you can see from Oklahoma's stats, that defense is what wins games for this Oklahoma Sooners team. And if they're going to make their way to the playoffs and be competitive in the playoffs, they're going to have to do that through this defense. I lean on the defense. I lean on the run defense being able to stop, at least slow Missouri down enough to be able to come away with this one with a win. Tucker, how do you feel about the Sooners' chances here, being able to close out the season?
Josh, you're spot on about the run defense after having seen it in person, what it can do to a team. Because Tennessee, as it's been discovered by people who thought it was an air raid previously, the first two seasons that Josh Heupel was there. No, it is very much based on establishing the pass because you were able to run the football well. Tennessee overall has not been as effective at running the ball as it has been in years past, but make no mistake, that is something it still wants to do. And Oklahoma was very good about shutting it down. And you're looking at a lot of plays on first down that are just 1-2 yard runs. You're not getting that 4 or 5 that you want to get on first down. And that's why Oklahoma was able to win that game. Aside from the turnovers, which were obviously a big part of it, you have a defensive touchdown in both the games against Tennessee and Alabama. And like you mentioned, Alabama have been horrible at running the football all season long. I mean, it's their worst rushing attack in 27 years. So you had to focus on the pass a little bit more. And then, of course, with Pribula, like if he's doubtful, and I don't know if you can go from doubtful to questionable to probable on an availability report. I'd have to look into that a little bit more. But if he is in fact doubtful, you are looking at a situation now where they're going to lean heavily on that run game with Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts. Of course, Ahmad Hardy went for a career day and a half against Andrews Bulldogs last week, but that is something that I don't think he's
Forgot that
going to
was
be able
against
to.
Mississippi State too. I apologize for bringing that up now. But.
Yeah, yeah, that's a game that you were able to do that in because Mississippi State is not strong against the run defensively. Oklahoma is one of the toughest run defenses in the league, probably the toughest run defense in the league that Mizzou is going to have to face. Now, I think the kickoff time and then, maybe the jersey curse, the Unity jersey curse is something that could play into it a little bit, make it a little bit closer than expected. But definitely think Oklahoma's going to win this game.
Well, and I don't know. I mean, I feel like it could be just a curse just because they're playing with those Unity jerseys in daytime. But I don't know the exact record, but I feel like Oklahoma typically wins when wearing those uniforms too. But I don't know. It's just everything that goes into this game. Andrew, I believe that this is possibly Oklahoma's most difficult game all season long. And it's not the most difficult opponent by far. But I think it's the most difficult game because of all the momentum that Oklahoma has built up for itself leading into this game. Are they able to carry that over, or do they get themselves maybe a little too ahead of them, get ahead of themselves just a little bit too much, and they're not able to focus on the foe at hand? And that's kind of where I stand here with Oklahoma, really, in these last two games being very difficult for them just because. Are you able to close this thing out and win against the team that you ought to win against?
I think they can, and I do think, going back to talking about Oklahoma's defense, it is a favorable matchup with as well as they have played run defense this year. Missouri, even when Bo Pribula was still healthy, once they got into conference play, it became very clear that he is very limited as a passer. And even with Mizzou having a couple talented weapons in the receiving core with Kevin Coleman, Brett Norfleet, he couldn't get him the football. Now, their offense was still functioning because of how good their run game is, and also Pribula is a factor with his legs. So when you have that dual threat capability along with a couple really good backs, you can make something happen, scheme up some easy touches to those pass catchers, and they were able to sort of keep things going just well enough. With Pribula down, Zollers not only is limited as a passer because of his inexperience, he's not a runner either. So the offense is entirely stop Ahmad Hardy, Jamal Roberts, which is much easier said than done. But, Oklahoma's defense is a million times better than Mississippi State's. Now, I am a little interested. The style of run game from Missouri is a bit different than what OU has faced much of the year. You look at the rushing attacks OU has shut down. They're kind of spread teams that are – what they do in the run game is a lot of based around the spacing, and we're taking advantage of a light box count as opposed to just being a power team. And Missouri loves that stretch zone run play that they really lean on. The one team that has kind of hit Oklahoma with that this year was Texas. I know that's a big part of the Texas game plan in their run game, and the Longhorns didn't have a huge day on the ground, but they ran the ball well enough to have some success on offense. So I do wonder about that a little bit with Missouri having a much better O-line than Texas and having better running backs than Texas. Could that be something for OU? But if you're talking about Brett Venables, one of the best defensive minds in the country, he has seen that now once this year, and because he made the right adjustments to where he can at least limit Missouri enough. By and large, if you're going to attack this OU defense, it has had to been through the air. That's what the last few teams that have been able to move the ball have been able to do. I don't trust Missouri to be able to do that. As for the other side of the ball, I will say Missouri's defensive front against the OU offensive line, they're probably going to have some success in getting after Mateer. But Mateer being a guy who can extend plays with his legs, I do think you're starting to see some emergence of OU figuring things out a little bit more offense over the last few weeks and getting a little bit more consistent back into a rhythm. They're still not great on that side of the ball, but Missouri, if you're not giving up a sack, you can kind of move it on them a little bit. And Mississippi State saw that this past week as when they weren't under constant pressure and not just calling quarterback run a million times with a quarterback that can't run. That's not a problem for John Mateer, fortunately for OU. They were able to move it a little bit. So I think OU at home will be able to do just enough on offense. I think their defense, again, the style of Missouri's run game, I am watching for that. Does that give OU more problems than we've seen some of these other teams this year? But I ultimately would trust OU's defense at home. I think they get the win. I think they probably can cover that number.
Yeah, I think if we're saying what should happen, Oklahoma should win and should cover, especially at that 7.5, where I believe it opened at 9.5. I feel confident that should happen. It's just that Oklahoma has also been one of those teams that have been just kind of a mystery for most people, just because they come out and they show something one week and then they don't show that same strength the next week, where the defense, obviously one that they're leaning on. I think all three of us are probably in agreement that the reason why they will probably win this game is because of that defense. Tucker, if you still have that availability report up, what does Oklahoma's running backs look like too? Because I'm curious to see, do they have Torrey Blaylock and Xavier Robinson listed on that availability report?
They do not.
Okay. Wow. So that's actually a shock. So that's one that I'm a little curious to see how plays out. Is how Oklahoma's running back room looks, but not that I would really have a whole lot of faith that they would get a whole lot going in that running game. But having your top two backs in would definitely be more favorable. But nonetheless. Anyways, I think that's pretty much all that we've got for you guys here tonight. Previewing week 13. Had to make sure I said the right number there. Man, already to week 13. Closing in on what could be the college football playoffs very soon. And very exciting times here for a lot of different teams. I mean, I think you look at the field and it just is not what you would have expected, I think, in the beginning of the season. IU being number 2 in the nation and undefeated at this point, and probably closing out their season undefeated. And then, of course, I even think Oklahoma being where they're at, and just the way that things have fell out, and how deep the SEC has been this year has really been kind of a shock to many. But anyways, we appreciate everybody so much for tuning in. If you would, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, help us keep on growing here. Share the show as well. That helps us so much. But we appreciate everybody. I am Josh Mahler. I'm joined by Andrew Miller and Tucker Harlan. We'll catch you all next time.